This video is about Europe's divisive wars that challenged nationalism. Subscribe for more. In the heart of Berlin, the rumble of distant artillery echoed through the cobblestone streets, a sound too familiar to those who had endured the ravages of the Great War. The year was 1938, and a fragile peace hung over Europe like a curtain poised to fall. Adolf Hitler stood atop the Reichstag steps, delivering impassioned speeches that stirred a nation hungry for pride. Around him, fervent supporters raised their arms in salute, voices chanting the promise of a restored Germany, oblivious to the shadows deepening on the horizon. Among the throngs was Anna Weiss, a young Jewish woman with dreams of becoming a historian, a dream that felt increasingly precarious. She had witnessed the rise of the Nazi regime with a mix of horror and disbelief. The oppressive atmosphere weighed on her, friends vanished overnight, and the whispers of war grew louder. Yet Anna was unwilling to succumb to fear. Armed with her father's books on European history, she sought the truth hidden beneath the propaganda, determined to uncover the past lessons for the future. Across the Atlantic, in Washington, President Franklin D. Roosevelt peered at a map of Europe. Intelligence reports flooded his desk, warning of Germany's aggressive expansion. "The world is a dangerous place," he muttered, passing a hand over his thinning hair. The dilemma was palpable. America had just emerged from one of the largest conflicts in its history, the Great War, and the scars were still fresh. Isolationism beckoned from the shadows, yet Roosevelt sensed the urgency to act, the need to rally a weary nation against tyranny. Meanwhile, in Jerusalem, the tensions escalated between Jewish settlers and Arab inhabitants. David Cohen, a passionate Zionist and leader within the Jewish community, stood before a gathering in a makeshift hall, the air thick with anticipation. He exclaimed, his voice resonating with the fervor of a people yearning for a sanctuary. Their history, marred by persecution, had brought them here, and the fight for a homeland had begun to intertwine with the looming specter of violence from Europe. In Berlin, Anna attended a clandestine meeting with a group of dissidents who sought to resist the Nazi regime. Among them was Marcus Klein, a former soldier with a haunted past. "We cannot allow this madness to continue," he urged, the intensity of his conviction igniting a spark within her. "We must gather evidence of the regime's atrocities. If we can expose the truth, perhaps we can ignite a movement." Their mission was perilous, but Anne felt the weight of history upon her shoulders, her resolve solidifying. Back in the United States, Roosevelt convened with his closest advisors, their faces grave as they debated how to respond to the unfolding crisis. "We cannot ignore this," he stated firmly, his finger tracing the lines of Europe on the map. "But what can we do?" A voice in the room hesitated. "The public supports isolationism. We cannot risk involvement." Roosevelt, however, remained undeterred, envisioning a united front against tyranny that transcended borders. Across Europe, whispers of war grew louder, drawing lines between nations. The Munich Agreement had failed to quell Hitler's ambitions. In London, Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain's attempts at diplomacy crumbled, leaving only a fragile alliance teetering on the brink. As tensions escalated, Anna and her group uncovered a network of Nazi spies active within Berlin, their mission now twisted into a race against time. They had to gather evidence before their own lives were snuffed out like candles in the wind. David's dreams in Jerusalem grew increasingly complex. The British mandate faltered under pressure, and the Arab revolt boiled over, causing widespread violence. David's message of unity was met with resistance, and the community began to fracture. He shouted at a divided gathering, "Our struggle is just, our fight for our homeland is rightful." But as clashes erupted in the streets, his resolve was tested, and he soon realized the fight would be against not only external forces, but also within their ranks. With the backdrop of war casting its ominous shadow, Anna's group executed their plan. They infiltrated meetings of high-ranking Nazi officials, gathering documents that laid bare the regime's intentions. Late one night, as they huddled in a dimly lit cellar, Anne's heart raced as she examined a dossier filled with horrifying details about concentration camps in development. The urgency of their mission pressed upon her. They had to get this information to the world. In the United States, Roosevelt faced mounting pressure from Congress and the public. An isolationist sentiment fueled by the memories of the Great War was palpable. He knew that to combat the growing threat from Germany, he needed to sway public opinion. "We must prepare ourselves," he declared in a radio address, "to support those who fight for freedom, wherever they may be." The seeds of intervention were sown, but the road ahead remained perilous. As Europe descended further into chaos, Anna's group made a dangerous decision. They would leak the information to the foreign press, risking their lives for a cause that felt increasingly hopeless. The night before their plan was to unfold, Anna encountered Marcus outside the cellar, and their eyes met with unspoken understanding. "Whatever happens, we are in this together," he reassured her. The weight of their mission settled heavily upon them, intertwined with the fate of not just their lives, but countless others. In Jerusalem, David faced a critical moment. The Arab revolt had escalated into violence, leading to retaliatory measures from the British authorities. His community was caught in the crossfire, tensions mounting on every side. "They will not take our home from us," he vowed, rallying a group to defend their settlement. This would not just be a fight for land, it was a fight for identity, for survival. The stage was set as the fires of nationalism flickered dangerously across Europe, fueled by histories both shared and divided. Anna's group prepared for their bold move, unaware of the consequences that would ripple across the ocean. The world was at a precipice, the threads of fate weaving together the lives of a historian in Berlin, a president in Washington, and a leader in Jerusalem. As reports of violence and unrest flooded in, both Anna and David found themselves at the epicenter of a storm that threatened to engulf them. Unbeknownst to them, their paths would soon intertwine with America's own journey into war. The mystery of how their fates would converge loomed on the horizon, a tapestry of history waiting to unfold. In the stillness of the night, as Anna prepared to risk everything to expose the truth, a chilling realization swept over her. The very forces she sought to defy were closing in, and time was slipping through her fingers like grains of sand. What would she sacrifice for the sake of truth? And what awaited in the shadows of history that threatened to tear apart the fragile alliances forming across continents? The echoes of war reverberated louder, each heartbeat synchronizing with the impending chaos. The world held its breath as Anna, David, and Roosevelt prepared to face a reality that would challenge the very notion of nationalism and unity. The stage was set for a confrontation that would redefine their destinies. What would become of their ambitions in a world teetering on the edge of annihilation? The answer lingered in the air like smoke from a battlefield, a promise of upheaval and transformation. As dawn broke over Europe, the clash of ideals, identities, and histories loomed ever closer. The web of fate was tightening, and soon, the world would bear witness to the fierce battle for a future steeped in the lessons of the past. The clash was inevitable, it was merely a matter of when. And as the sun rose, illuminating the shadows cast by their uncertainty, one question remained: would they stand united against the tide, or would the forces of division prevail? Part 2 awaited on the horizon, a story yet to be written, echoing the struggles of those who dared to dream of a different tomorrow. The morning sun cast long shadows over the Berlin streets, illuminating the faces of citizens whose lives were irrevocably altered by the encroaching storm. Anna Weiss stepped cautiously into the light, her heart pounding with the weight of the mission ahead. Today was the day they would reveal the truth to the world. The air thrummed with tension, thick with unspoken fears and unyielding resolve. Inside the cellar, a group gathered around the table, the dossier spread before them like an open wound. "Today, we become the voice for those who cannot speak," Marcus Klein declared, his tone steady despite the quiver in his hands. The others nodded, their expressions a mix of determination and dread as they prepared to enter the lion's den of the Nazi propaganda machine. Meanwhile, in Washington, D., President Franklin D. Roosevelt was meeting with his closest advisors, the anxiety palpable in the room. "If we were to stand against this tyranny, we must act decisively," he reiterated. The map of Europe sprawled out like a battlefield before them. "We can no longer afford to wait for the world to catch up with us." The echoes of past conflicts haunted the discussions, the scars of the Great War still raw in the minds of many. "President," one advisor cautioned, "the American public is still wary of another engagement. The isolationist sentiment is strong. We risk political backlash." Roosevelt leaned back, his sharp mind racing through the complexities of leadership in a time of impending chaos. He knew that waiting could be fatal. Every moment lost meant more lives at stake. As Anna and her group made their preparations, David Cohen stood amidst the growing tension in Jerusalem. The Arab revolt frayed the fabric of their community, and he felt the weight of leadership pressing upon him like an anvil. "We must show our strength, our unity," he urged, rallying his supporters in the courtyard. "Our fight is not just for land, but for our legacy." Yet the clamor of dissent echoed in the shadows, fractures forming among those who once stood resolute. The sun hung high as Anna and her group finally made their move. They scattered throughout the city, each member tasked with delivering the dossier to key figures in foreign media. Anna clutched her copy tightly, her fingers trembling as she navigated through the bustling streets of Berlin. The city that had once felt like home now pulsed with danger at every corner. As she approached the office of a prominent newspaper, her breath quickened. The walls seemed to close in, each step echoing the gravity of her mission. Once inside, she was met by a skeptical editor, a man hardened by the harsh realities of the world around him. "You expect me to print this?" he scoffed, eyeing the dossier with disdain. "You think this will change anything?" It is the truth, Anne insisted, her voice steadying. "The world needs to know what is happening in Germany. Ignoring it will only lead to greater disaster." The editor paused, the weight of her words settling heavily. Just as the editor began to reconsider, a commotion erupted outside. The doors burst open, and a group of uniformed Nazis stormed in, their eyes scanning the room like hawks. Panic surged through Anna as she ducked behind a desk, her heart racing. She is to the editor, who now wore a mask of terror. "And not yet," he whispered back, his eyes darting back to the men in uniform. "We have to play this smart." Meanwhile, Roosevelt had summoned Congress for an emergency session. He stood before the assembly, his voice firm but filled with urgency. "Our allies are suffering, and if we do not act, we risk emboldening this tyranny." He outlined a plan to lend aid to those resisting oppression in Europe, urging Congress to look beyond isolationism. As he spoke, many in the audience shifted uneasily in their seats, haunted by the memories of the Great War. "We need to prepare for the possibility of war," he emphasized, his passion igniting a flicker of hope in the room. The fight for freedom was not just a foreign issue, it was a call to protect the very values they held dear. Back in Jerusalem, David faced battles of his own. Clashes erupted in the streets as tensions between Jewish settlers and Arab inhabitants reached a boiling point. David watched as families were torn apart, the dream of a homeland bloodied by violence. "This cannot continue," he shouted to the gathered crowd, desperation etching lines on his face. "We are fighting for our future, not against each other." But the words fell on deaf ears, drowned out by the chaos that surrounded them. As stones flew and cries filled the air, David's spirit faltered. The struggle for identity and survival became blurred, and he realized that unity was the only path forward amidst the chaos. Back in Berlin, Anne's heart pounded as she witnessed the Nazis interrogating the editor, the tension escalating as she remained hidden. Time felt like an enemy, each second stitching into eternity. She had to act, had to save the information that could change everything. The door to the office creaked open, and she saw her chance. With a swift movement, she slipped out the back entrance, clutching the dossier tightly against her chest. As she navigated through narrow alleys, she felt the urgency of her mission weighing on her. The stakes had risen, their efforts were no longer just about revealing the truth but about survival. She ducked into a small cafe, her breath steadying as she leaned against the wall, glancing over her shoulder. In the United States, Roosevelt's firm resolve began to shift the public tide. Reports flooded in from across the Atlantic, sowing seeds of discontent among the isolationists. "We cannot turn a blind eye," he continued to assert, rallying the nation toward collective action. The people were beginning to stir, a restless energy igniting as they recognized the threat looming over Europe. Days turned into weeks, and Anna's group continued their desperate fight against the regime. The leaks they had orchestrated began to influence foreign opinion, awareness spreading like wildfire. But the Nazis were relentless. An air of dread enveloped Berlin as arrests intensified, leaving Anna more determined than ever. "Every document we spread is a chance to save lives," Marcus reminded her one evening as they prepared to send out more evidence. "We cannot let fear paralyze us." Anna's spirit ignited anew. They were no longer just a group of dissidents. They had transformed into a movement, each act of bravery carving a space for hope amidst despair. The truth was a weapon, and they wielded it fiercely. As tensions flared in Jerusalem and the streets of Berlin, Roosevelt prepared to make his most critical address yet. The world was watching, and the fate of nations hinged on the choices they made in the coming weeks. Anna felt the tug of destiny pulling her toward an uncertain future, a future that would intertwine with the very fabric of international politics. The clash of ideologies echoed louder, voices rising against the tide of darkness. The stage was set for an unprecedented confrontation, a battle that would not just determine the fate of individuals but the very essence of freedom across continents. As Anna stood at the precipice of her own journey, a chilling thought gripped her. They were not merely fighting against tyranny, they were fighting for the soul of humanity itself. In the shadows, the forces of division were mobilizing, and the clock was ticking down to the inevitable collision of ideals. Would they stand united against the tide, or would the darkness consume them all? The world held its breath, waiting for the next move in a game where every life hung in the balance. The question lingered in the air, ripe with possibility. Would the courage of a historian, a president, and a visionary leader be enough to change the course of history? Part 3 awaited, the threads of fate tightening, woven into a tapestry of war, hope, and resilience. As darkness fell upon Berlin, the city seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the inevitable clash that would reverberate through history. Anna Weiss paced nervously in the dim light of the cellar where her group had gathered. The mood was somber yet charged. They had become a beacon of resistance against the oppressive regime that sought to silence the truth. Each member glanced at the dossier spread across the table, the weight of responsibility heavy in the air. "We cannot waver," Marcus Klein urged, his voice ringing with urgency. "Every moment we delay gives them an advantage." Outside, the streets were eerily quiet, but the tension was palpable. Anna thought of the editor who had hesitated to publish their findings. Would others follow suit, or would fear keep them silent? She had to take the next step to ensure the truth would not perish in the shadows. In the United States, President Franklin D. Roosevelt faced an equally daunting task. The pressure to act was mounting. As he strode into the Oval Office, a palpable determination radiated from him. He gathered his advisors, their faces etched with concern. "The American public is beginning to listen," he declared, pointing to the latest reports. One advisor voiced the doubts that lingered in many hearts. "But Mr. President, thousands still cling to isolationist beliefs. If we act, we risk inflaming tensions at home." Roosevelt pressed his fingers together, contemplating the duality of his role as a leader. The silent screams of victims across the ocean haunted him. "We cannot afford to be passive. This is not just a political issue, it is a moral imperative." Meanwhile, in Jerusalem, David Cohen stood at the center of a fraying community. The Arab revolt had escalated, fracturing the delicate balance that had once united them in their quest for a homeland. "We are not enemies," he shouted to a crowd that had turned hostile, their faces twisted with anger and despair. "Our fight is against oppression, not against each other." Yet, his words barely penetrated the storm of chaos swirling around them. David felt the despair creeping in, the fear that their dreams of a homeland were slipping through their fingers. He knew that unity was paramount, but how could he rally the people when the very fabric of their community was tearing apart? Back in Berlin, Anna and her group decided to take the risk and expand their reach. With the knowledge that the truth must be shared, they planned to send a copy of the dossier to journalists beyond Germany's borders. "We'll distribute it to the foreign correspondents," Anna suggested, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her. "The world needs to see what is happening here." As they meticulously prepared copies and addressed envelopes, the reality of their situation loomed large. Each document they sent out was a lifeline for the oppressed, a chance to ignite the flames of resistance. The next day, Anna cautiously navigated through Berlin's streets, her heart pounding as she approached a cafe frequented by foreign journalists. She clutched the dossier tightly, rehearsing her speech in her mind. As she entered, the familiar clinking of cups and murmurs of conversation faded into a hush. She spotted a journalist sitting alone, scribbling notes in a tattered notebook. "Excuse me," Anne said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Are you?" Before she could finish, a group of Nazis stormed in, their presence instantly suffocating the room. Fear rippled through the cafe as patrons instinctively shrank back. Anna's heart raced. She had no choice but to act quickly. Pushing through the crowd, she maneuvered behind the counter, her instincts screaming for her to survive. The journalist, curious yet cautious, followed her lead. "What is going on?" he whispered, eyes darting toward the entrance. "The evidence," Anna breathed, urgency lacing her voice. "You have to expose it. The world needs to know." She handed him a copy of the dossier just as the group of Nazis scoured the room for dissenters. Meanwhile, President Roosevelt, fueled by the urgency of the situation, addressed the American people through a radio broadcast. "My fellow Americans, we find ourselves at a crossroads," he began, his voice resonating with conviction. "As we witness the atrocities perpetrated by the Nazi regime, we must ask ourselves, what kind of nation do we want to be?" Reports from Europe had flooded the papers, igniting outrage among citizens. Roosevelt seized the moment, painting a picture of solidarity and calling for unity. "We cannot stand idly by while tyranny ravages our brothers and sisters across the ocean. It is time for us to stand for freedom." In that moment, the tide began to shift. Isolationist sentiments wavered as the emotional weight of Roosevelt's message sunk into the hearts of the citizens. Across the nation, people began to gather in small groups, discussing the war and the role the United States had to play. Back in Jerusalem, David, too, was battling against the tide of hatred threatening to engulf his community. He stood on a makeshift platform, addressing a crowd that hungered for leadership. "We cannot let fear dictate our actions," he shouted. "If we are to fight for our homeland, we must unite, not divide. Our future depends on our ability to come together. Yet the fractures in the crowd were deepening. Voices of dissent rose against him, insisting that their struggles were separate. As the situation escalated, David felt the despair tightening around him, a noose of division that threatened to choke the life out of their dreams. In Berlin, Anna's heart raced as she witnessed the Nazis closing in on the calf. She couldn't remain hidden any longer. Taking a deep breath, she emerged from behind the counter, her resolve hardening. "You won't silence us," she declared, stepping boldly into the open. The journalist she had approached earlier caught her gaze, and together they stood against the encroaching darkness. Just as the storm of uniforms surged forward, a siren wailed in the distance, piercing the tension in the air. Anna knew she had to make a choice to fight or flee. In that fleeting moment, she understood the essence of her struggle. They were fighting not just for themselves, but for the future of all those who dreamed of freedom. Roosevelt pressed forward with his agenda, sensing the palpable shift in public sentiment. "We must provide assistance to those who resist oppression," he insisted during another meeting with Congress, his determination unyielding. "We owe it to every soul suffering in the clutches of tyranny." As he spoke, the winds of change began to sweep across America. Letters poured in from citizens supporting Roosevelt's vision, urging action. The once quiet murmur of dissent transformed into a chorus demanding justice for the suffering far away. At the same time, Anna's heart raced as she felt the urgency of their action swell. They had become the voice of the oppressed, the vanguard of truth in a world shrouded in lies. But as the Nazis advanced, she realized they had no safety net. "We must get this out, now," she urged, determination igniting within her. Outside, the sirens continued to wail, and Anna's thoughts raced. Would they be able to deliver their message to the world, or would the forces of division snuff out their flame? As the group prepared to escape, the stakes grew high. They were on the brink of a battle not just for their lives, but for the very essence of humanity. In Jerusalem, David was fighting his own battle against time. The sentiments of division surged, threatening to consume the last remnants of unity. He rallied his supporters, desperate to forge a common cause amidst the chaos. "We are one people, and our fight is for our future," he cried, the fire of conviction in his eyes. Yet, with every plea, the fractures deepened. The weight of history pressed down on him, and he wondered if their dreams would be buried beneath the rubble of conflict. As the dawn broke over Berlin, Anna and her group made a narrow escape from the calf, clutching the remnants of their truth. They dashed through the streets, hearts pounding, determined to share their findings with the world. The clock was ticking, and the path ahead was fraught with uncertainty. In the distance, the rumbling of war grew louder, a relentless tide threatening to drown out their efforts. And as Roosevelt prepared the nation for an impending storm, the stage was set for a confrontation that would define the course of history. Anna, David, and Roosevelt were on a collision course, their destinies interwoven in a tapestry of struggle and hope. Would the courage of a historian, a president, and a visionary leader be enough to change the course of history, or would the forces of division prevail in their bid for power? The answer loomed like a specter on the horizon, a promise of tumult and transformation that lay just beyond reach, waiting to be realized. The world held its breath, poised for the next chapter in a tale that would echo through the annals of time. As Anna dashed through the streets of Berlin, the air thick with the scent of impending conflict, her heart raced with the urgency of their mission. She glanced back at her fellow dissidents, their faces etched with determination, yet shadows of fear lingered in their eyes. Each for full echoed the weight of their purpose. They were the harbingers of truth, poised to challenge the darkness encroaching upon Europe. Meanwhile, President Franklin D. Roosevelt stood resolute at his desk in the Oval Office, the weight of the world resting on his shoulders. His previous speeches had stirred the American public, yet whispers of doubt still lingered among some in Congress. To date, however, he felt a shift and awakening that could not be ignored. The cries for justice from across the Atlantic were growing louder, and he was determined to translate that urgency into action. "The time for indecision has passed," he declared in another radio address, his voice steady and firm. "We must arm ourselves with resolve, not just for our sake, but for the sake of humanity." The American people were beginning to rally, their hearts ignited by the stories pouring in from Europe. Citizens gathered in town halls and living rooms, discussing the dire realities faced by those who were fighting against tyranny. On the other side of the world, David Cohen stood amidst a sea of unrest in Jerusalem. The community surrounding him was fracturing under the weight of fear and mistrust, the very essence of their struggle for a homeland threatened by division. He had witnessed the consequences of disunity firsthand, and his heart ached for the loss of shared purpose. "We cannot afford to be at odds with one another," he implored, his voice rising above the cacophony of dissent. Our fight is against oppression, not each other. The world is watching us, and if we fracture now, we risk losing everything. But the tumultuous atmosphere stifled his message, and doubt hung heavily in the air, stalling their collective momentum. Back in Berlin, Anna and her group had secured a meeting with an influential foreign journalist, a man known for his integrity and commitment to exposing the truth. As they entered the dimly lit office, the atmosphere was tense, but Anna felt a spark of hope igniting within her. They laid the dossier across the desk, the weight of evidence palpable between them. "This is more than just a collection of documents," Anna asserted, her voice unwavering. "It is a testament to the human cost of this regime. The world must know." The journalist examined the contents with a discerning eye, and Anna sensed the gravity of the moment. "If I print this, it will change everything," he replied, his brow furrowing in contemplation. "We've already risked everything," Marcus interjected, his voice steady. "What we do today can save countless lives. The truth must prevail." After a moment of silence, the journalist nodded, his resolve solidifying. "The world deserves to know what is happening here." As they left the office, Anna felt a swell of hope, but the threat of the Nazis loomed large. They had ignited a fire that could spread across the ocean, but she knew the cost of such courage could be dire. The realization did not escape her. This was a battle against time, and each moment could spell disaster. Across the ocean, Roosevelt's message resonated with the American public. As letters of support poured into the White House, the tide began to turn against isolationism. Citizen groups organized rallies demanding action, and the urgency of the situation galvanized many who had previously been indifferent. The notion of standing by while others suffer felt increasingly untenable. "President, the people are ready," one advisor noted as Roosevelt reviewed the latest reports. "They want to support those in need, but we must find a way to act without formally entering the war." Roosevelt nodded, his mind racing with possibilities. "Perhaps we can provide aid, arms, and support for those resisting Nazism. We can create a network of allies who share our values." As Roosevelt laid the groundwork for this new strategy, the world was watching closely, waiting to see how the United States would respond to the growing crisis. Meanwhile, in Jerusalem, David's plea for unity was met with a moment of silence, and he seized the opportunity. "Let us remember our shared history. We are survivors, and we have a chance to build a future together." Slowly, the crowd began to respond, murmurs of agreement rising among them. They needed a common cause, and David felt a spark of hope igniting again. "We must stand together against all odds for our right to build a homeland." As tensions eased and solidarity began to take root, David's heart swelled with the realization that the future rested on their ability to unite. They would rally not just against an external enemy, but also against the divisions that threatened to tear apart their community. Back in Berlin, Anna and her group were racing against the clock as news of their dossier spread. Each day felt like an eternity, each moment fraught with danger. They had become symbols of resistance, but that very recognition painted a target on their backs. As night fell, they gathered once more, voices low, strategizing their next move. "We need to get out of Berlin," Marcus suggested, casting wary glances toward the door. "The pressure is mounting, and we risk being discovered." Anna nodded, a heart heavy with the thought of leaving behind the city that had been her home. "We have to make sure our message reaches those who can act on it." Just then, a loud crash echoed from the street outside, jolting them to their feet. The sounds of shouting grew louder, and dread seeped through the cracks in their resolve. One of the members cried, "Quickly, we need to split up and meet at the safe house," Anna commanded, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside her. As they hurried through the back alleys, Anna's mind raced with thoughts of what had been sacrificed for this mission. Each step brought her closer to a future uncertain but filled with purpose. Meanwhile, as Roosevelt's plan took shape, the first shipments of aid and supplies began to flow toward European allies resisting Nazism. The American public rallied behind the effort, ignited by the knowledge that their actions could make a difference. The tide had turned, and President Roosevelt felt a renewed sense of purpose. They were on the brink of something monumental. Days passed, and the tension in Jerusalem began to ease as David's message of unity spread. They organized joint community gatherings to foster understanding between Jewish settlers and Arab inhabitants. Slowly but surely, a fragile sense of solidarity emerged, a collective determination to withstand the external chaos. On that fateful day, as Anna and her group reconvened at the safe house, breathless and filled with adrenaline, they prepared to send out their final message, one that would galvanize the world. Anna addressed the group, her voice strong. we must ensure that our efforts are not in vain. The world must know our story." With determined hands, they compiled their findings, embedding their testimonies amidst the evidence of atrocities. The stakes had never been higher as they prepared for their last stand against tyranny. As dawn broke over Berlin, the safe house became a hive of activity. They packed the documents and prepared to send them off to critical figures in the international community. Just as Anna stood ready to leave, the door flung open, revealing a group of Nazis, faces menacing. "We know what you were doing," one shouted, stepping forward. Panic surged through the room as Anna and her group exchanged quick glances. But in that moment, Anna felt the weight of her ancestors' history behind her. "You will not silence us," she shouted back, defiance igniting within her. "We are fighting for the truth, and it will be heard." With a swift motion, she grabbed the documents and darted out the back door, the sound of chaos erupting behind her. Heart racing, she weaved through the streets towards the last contact who could ensure their message reached the world. As she ran, she envisioned the faces of those who would one day benefit from their courage, the victims of oppression, the dreamers yearning for freedom. Her feet moved faster, fueled by hope and determination. In Washington, D. News arrived of Anna's group's efforts, igniting a wave of solidarity across the nation. Roosevelt took to the airwaves once more, rallying the American spirit and calling for unity in the face of tyranny. "Today, we stand with those who resist oppression. Together, we can forge a future where freedom reigns," he declared, his voice powerful and unwavering. As Anna finally reached her destination, breathless and trembling, she handed over the documents to the journalist. "This is it," she gasped. The journalist nodded, determination shining in his eyes. "I'll make sure this reaches the world." As Anna stepped back into the cold air of Berlin, the weight of the mission felt light. She had done her part, fighting not just for herself or her people, but for all who yearned for freedom. In the months to come, the revelations from Berlin would ripple across the globe, igniting a firestorm of outrage and prompting action from nations once hesitant to intervene. David, too, would find his